So I think there's lots of other actors that we could talk about, and I think rather than open it up now for commentary from the floor, I'm going to hand it over to Suresh to take us through a metacard analysis. And so this is where the work of workshop really comes into play here. So you'll all be working at your tables, but I'll ask Suresh to explain the exercise.
Thank you. Thank you. We'd like to take advantage of the fact that about 50 people in this room, over 7 tables, all of you work in specific contexts and within specific frames. It's nice to speculate on the use of a film or of a role play, but we all have to work within organizational frames. We're looking at evidence-based research, we're looking at policy impact, and the subtitle of our session here says Tactics for Policy Impact, and I presume everyone here knows the meaning of a tactic. So we thought, as a takeaway from here, so that we don't all indulge in a lot of commentary and discussion, can we work in tables? So those of you who are not attached to a table, could you just align yourself with one so that it makes it a bit easier? So that I'll give 2 questions to each table, and each table can respond to those 2 questions so that we have a summary of ideas that we can go home with at the end of the session. No. Right. It's very simple, really. For 10 minutes, could each table discuss? I know you all come from different working conditions and different contexts. Even so, for 10 minutes, please discuss and come back with just 2 ideas per table on what has worked as a tactic for policy impact, so that we get a harvesting of opinions here on what has worked in your own condition or circumstance. And if you'd like to elaborate that, I'll give you the time for that, okay? And on this side, what do we avoid when we are trying to do policy impact with evidence-based research? What are the things we need to be careful about, right? It's pretty simple. What we want to do is, I'll distribute these markers. So each table needs to just appoint someone who will write those 2 points on either side, okay? What works for you and what should we be careful about? That's it, in terms of tactics. Then let's take stock of what comes up and have a discussion on that. We need to start now. Can I call on a table to give us their 2 points? You're ready. Right. Tell us what has worked. If one of you could just come and write a line there, explain it. Okay. One line, please, not more than that. Explain as much as you like. What has worked? Yeah. Right. Would you like to explain that? Use media strategically is the first point here.
Yeah. By strategic use of the media, by strategic use of the media, we mean that on one hand, there are different types of media. We should recognize their different characteristics, their limitations, and try to understand how to use them effectively to put our message across. Secondly, we should have persons who are trained in different types of media management, not necessarily persons from outside, but our own researchers, not persons with holding media diplomas, etc., but our own researchers who can understand the message which has to be put through, enhance their capacity for putting across the message. Thirdly, we should invest in creating networks with the media who can assist us to identify the different sources, the different places through which we can start putting our message across. And the second point, smart communication. Yeah. And the second point, smart communication, putting across the message quickly, based on evidence-based research, trying to avoid partisanship. We have to be impartial, only data-based or observations from the field. Secondly, at the end of it, after evaluating the situation, we have to give our opinion, make it constructive. And thirdly, we should not be partisan. We should also invest in networks with not only the media, as I pointed out, but also with different actors when they're in power, when they're outside power, treat it as a long-term investment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That side, please. Your 2 points. If you just speak it out, I'll write it for you. Might be a little faster.
So one tactic is, you see, the assumption here seems to be that we are going to the politician. But our table seems to think that you build a reputation which makes the politician comes to you to ask for your solutions to a problem. Okay? So build reputations for creating demand from politicians. The second one, am I okay? Second one, actually they're two all grouped together and it's even more complicated. The thing is that this one-shot, 2-minute business we didn't like. We said nothing of that kind is ever going to happen. So it is you create a basis for undertaking interactions, repeat interactions, for the problem that you want to solve, of course. So create a basis for undertaking repeat interactions, which can include cocktail parties. And then the thing will, and it can only happen through repeat performances. So your message, learning over time through iteration and repeat performances of that. So never expect to get your point in at the first shot. So those are two. Then we had three, even more complicated one. I think I can leave it out, right?
Can I just point out, Dhariwal is much more coherent than this table was. This is a great example of summarizing.
Okay, I will be very short, just like our communication strategy. So the first important point that we all had a consensus on was to get the key stakeholders, that is the media, the policymakers, and others, involved in either the research or the formulation of the research in terms of defining the problem and communicating that from an early stage. So that's the key thing, was to get everyone on board early. And the second one was similar to the comment that they made about using using numbers, using indices with a very transparent methodology where people can know where those numbers came from. So using a transparent methodology to communicate numbers that can be effective in communicating the point.
Is actually, because I'm not quite sure I'm summarizing this well. But our what has worked is when we can actually be able to target the critical decision makers. We need to know who we need to be able to target who is actually making the decisions. It's really important to do that. The second one was also that the message that we convey to these critical decision makers need to be short, but they should not be simplified. They should not be, simplified too much. And they should come with a written backup. Come with some sort of, it's a bit like what was said earlier in the plenary. It needs to be backed up by some written evidence. The thing is that what we were saying was that these target decision makers, we really need to know what moves them to make a change, because we were of a consensus that evidence-based does not necessarily inspire change.
So from our table, we've kind of got similar kind of suggestions. The first is collaborate and not confront. So the policymakers, we would need to kind of collaborate with them for this. We've identified some of the tactics, developing informal channels, which also takes a lot of time. But more than that, it needs to be institutionalized, so there would be a need to kind of map out the power centers within, those who are more, who are receptive and would be willing to kind of take through the policy suggestions that are being made, and develop networks within the circles, such as with members of parliament. At times it might take a couple of years, but that needs to be kind of worked on. A suggestion was made about holding breakfast meetings, how it has worked in a specific context. The second thing sometimes is, of course, that's again what was told in the plenary, that getting the ear of the policy maker at times becomes really the most important issue. So once you have their ear, then maybe it is much easier to kind of just share it with them, but it's not that easy. So for that, we would need to talk to the policymaker using facts, substantiated with evidence, and have something that benefits them and doesn't really say that, this is the problem, so there needs to be solutions more, and substantiated with evidence. And another suggestion that came was that having an influential board of directors at times would also be really useful.
Add if I missed out on anything. So on our table, we thought there are 5 steps that I sort of summarized that had worked. So quick steps, very short ones, less than 100 words. So identification of the problem. Second is research, to get validation of research with academia as well as with for the government. Validation of the policy fix, the policy solution, through engagement. With academia, private sector, grassroots NGOs, and publications through reputed journals and in reputed journals and through reputed publishing houses. Yes. Yeah. Then engagement with the government itself. And within the government, parliamentary forums, ministers, politicians who may be aligned with the policy but need knowledge support. So these are and evidence-based meetings with the policy actors who may not be in the government but you know, may have influence. And then engagement with media. Yeah. And in that, talk show was one of the channel was through talk shows, and of course, documentaries and other channels of engagement. And I think if I've missed out anything, you can add, please.
No, it's just in terms of the communications, we're also working with the opinion shapers and training journalists.
It might just be how it's been presented on the board, but it looks very linear, that process. And I'm not sure that policy processes are all that linear. They tend to, you can jump to the engaging the media and find that the policy goes through, or I'm just, these are all tactics, so it's not represented. Okay. Okay. Sometimes you can be contracted to do research in the first place, which means that you're in on the policy process from the very beginning. So it can actually be, research can be towards the end of the process, potentially.
Thank you. You said 2 points, but since everyone has broken the rules, we shall present 3. So the first one is, know the needs of the policymakers, or know the needs of your target. 2, have prior preparations before engagement. And then 3, use multimedia tools.
Preparation.
Yeah, before engagement. Finally, we said use multimedia, various not media, but various forms of packaging. And a good example, illustration we have, is what was done during this exchange, where we have that, and we have that. And they all contain more or less the same information, but packaged in different formats to suit different needs. Yeah.
Any other stray thoughts that we should include here? Yes, please.
You see, strategy, if you talk of tactics is slightly different from strategy. I suppose if you ask me to list out tactics, I would assume that there is already some strategy in place, or some documents are in place, some research outputs are already available. Tactics would be something very tactical, very I think it'll depend, very contingent. You would like to, it'll be some kind of cleverness built into what you actually aim to do. So what I was trying to say is that when you actually, since doing policy advocacy or policy work, or persuade somebody for policy change, you would be engaging with multiple stakeholders. So you should really sell your policy as a product. A policy, so all stakeholders in that very policy process, we should be able to tell them that it works to your advantage. Whether to a civil servant, whether to a federal minister or to a state minister, it should be sold like a product in a market. That it all works to your advantage, whosoever you are there.
This is a quick question. It's very interesting in this discussion that we haven't talked about using, or have we? We haven't talked about using other people, particularly people, the electorate or the civil society, as a means of influencing the policymaker. So it's something that we are now trying to do in Sri Lanka, in SEPA. We are trying very hard to try to see whether because we can't hit the top political system, the decision makers as we know where they are, we are trying to see whether whether there is a possibility of influence, of creating a groundswell of opinion that would then influence the decision makers. So it's interesting that I would be interested if other people had examples of that happening.
We are academic organizations. We don't talk to people.
Well, that is a point that is very important for us to understand. We shouldn't think of using the media. That is the language that we'll be hearing now, using the media. Rather, we should work with the media. If the media thought being used, you are not going to get your result. But in the process of training the media, train them to report the particular issues. Media reports so many things. But train them to report that particular issue, and in the process, let them see that issue as their issue. Let them take ownership of that issue. When they, not that the media should be interested in reporting security, there is insecurity here, insecurity there. No, no, no. Train them in such a way that they will see that insecurity affecting them, affecting their work, affecting their family. Now, by the time they begin to see it with that spectacles, they will report it strategically, they will ask the right question. You will even, in fact, you can hands up. They will go ahead to the doorsteps of the policymakers and begin to effect that change. So we shouldn't think of using the media, but work with the media. Thank you.
I'd like to quickly go to the next group, and then we'll ask for comments. Okay. General summary, I think it's quite clear. Short, focused, targeted messages. There's also a lot of food and drink involved. There's breakfast and cocktails. And, and there's a lot of fun, I think. People are looking forward to a little lightening. You've done a lot of heavy work with regard to policy formulation or research to back policy. And then you want to use media, you want to use other stakeholders to promote it and take it forward. So there's a certain outward-looking character to these kind of inputs. Can we go to this side now, the gloom part of it? Okay.
On the gloom part, we had one, avoid technical jargon. And here the group felt that this is the biggest problem that researchers have. They always want to use their technical terms, and yet the rest of the people they are communicating to don't understand them. Then the other one was avoid having too many messages communicated at the same time, because then you will cause confusion. And then the third was always try to be neutral, avoid being partisan and antagonistic.
Well, yeah, great minds think alike. We said avoid jargon, avoid partisan politics. So, oh, there is one more. Sorry, what was that? Avoid overexposition of spokesmen to the media. Don't expose one person to the media all the time. You know, have multiple persons. Many spokespersons, yes. Overexposure. Avoid.
To you, come back.
Okay, so life at our table was not simple again. So when you're making a pitch, avoid vulnerabilities, or let me just explain. Do not add anything that might lead to your being attacked. Yeah, you should be clear about what messages you are putting forward. Should not be politically incorrect or anything like that. My table can add, of course.
Protect your weaknesses.
Yeah, in your messages, avoid. Yeah, politically incorrectness, I think that we are saying. The second point, yeah, please.
Don't subject messages to attack. That means you check in advance.
Right.
That's easier said than done.
Yes, absolutely. The second one is to clearly understand the scope of your claims. That is, you calibrate your message in the sense you don't overclaim and you don't underclaim.
Suresh, we actually framed it in a positive kind of way in terms of what to avoid, and no disrespect to our journalist friends here. We felt that the messages that we give out to the press should be clear. There should not be confusion in what we are saying. There should not be conflicting messages being given to the media. Then I think you'd lose the thrust of the message that you want to give, and sort of becomes self-defeating. So it's really, as we're talking about, train up. I think my colleagues have already mentioned this. Work with journalists, train them up, give them as much background information as possible, so that they can transmit what we are trying to say to the rest of the public. So that's one. Second, and this is more aimed at policymakers. Don't put them in a straitjacket, in the sense that give them an exit route. So don't frame the findings in kind of black and white, yes or no, but keep some gray areas so that people can agree with you, policymakers can agree with you, and can give support to what you're trying to do. So that's the other thing. Again, we've framed it positively, but what you avoid is black and white situation, us and them situation. So those are the two things that we came up. And I've been reminded, the other point that we did say, we talk about, is that don't come up with surprises. So that doesn't help. When you've done your work, agree on certain things, but then don't make things up as you go along. That's not a good idea. Thank you.
We came up with one warning signal, and it is within a context in terms of countries where democracy is not very strong. One thing to avoid for the think tanks is public confrontation with the decision makers. You'll have the least influence if you have public confrontation with the decision makers. So, how do you define public meaning if going out in the public and going out in the public to confront government and force the policy making. You have to find other ways of talking to the decision makers and influencing policy.
I remember another thing that was mentioned here was that when you are in an interview, never to fall on yes or no questions.
Well, the 2 points that actually we didn't have time to discuss in detail, but two points that came in mind. One is that not knowing who you should be talking to. So that didn't work. Yeah. If you don't know that who should you talk to, so that doesn't work. So that was the one signal. And the other is that you have to have a healthy distance from the government policymakers. I mean, don't work so close with the government, otherwise then your reputation will be at the stake. You won't be seen as an independent think tank. It wasn't discussed, but I just came in. Yeah. Because so it was a surprise for my table.
So a little bit that was discussed. We also felt that, I mean, most of the tactics might eventually work, so there's nothing that really doesn't work. Maybe a mix of something in a different proportion might work eventually. So that was to start off. But we also felt, some of us felt that the research question at times is not actionable. So that needs, the design of the research itself needs to be made more... Exactly. And the second thing was to not plan for it. I mean, one needs to, obviously, repeating this, prepare.
Editorial policy for tweeting. For tweeting. Have an editorial policy for tweeting.
It was really a question around should you have a tweet policy? Who can tweet? What can they tweet? Is there a quality control for tweet? Do you trust people? I'm seeing Owen shaking his head, so I presume not.
One last one.
Thank you. I was just asking myself, in the situation whereby we have multipartyism in a country, one of the warning signals that we have to avoid is trying to sideline other politicians, I mean those who are not in power, because they're the ones also helping on pushing the agenda, especially when they're in discussion, parliamentary discussion. So trying not to avoid them, just to include them as other stakeholders. Thank you.
I just thought of this. Get your guys into government.
We'll get them out of government. I'm going to wrap up. We don't have very long. Lunch comes next, right? So I just want to reflect on the session we've had today, beginning with where we started, which was the survey that was conducted before the conference, which was the strong need that people felt for support on how to package policy ideas to present them in a way that would attract attention and get them taken up. The need for communication strategies and support with technical issues about things like how to run websites, how to do multimedia and so on. We've had some great conversation today about solving some of those problems. It seems to me that there is quite a long way to go, that people, and it seems to me one of the things that we should be thinking about is how we can continue to share ideas and practical experience at a kind of more practical level. I sensed in the room that there was demand for that and interest in that, and that seems to me one of the takeaway points for the think tank initiative is to think about how we can do more practical sharing of ideas and lesson learning with communications people and so on. Navdip's video, it seems to me, struck a chord with many of us as how powerful and effective that was, particularly for framing a problem. What I thought was interesting about the video was that it wasn't setting out the answers, we need this kind of legislation and so on, but you couldn't watch that video and not think at the end of it, blimey, we need to do something about this, right? So, and that's a really important part of the process that think tanks need to participate in. We need to frame and articulate problems and create a sense that these are problems that should and can be solved, so that the solutions as think tanks that we come up with then have a ready audience. And it seems to me this kind of video and that kind of outreach and communication is a really important part of that. Videos can also be part of solutions. We had an experience recently at the Center for Global Development. Our work is focused on targeting policymakers in rich and powerful countries and institutions. And we were advocating a particular kind of sanctions that could be used against Syria. And one of our colleagues did a 4-minute video. We did it in-house, used a normal digital SLR camera and filmed it in-house. Took her all day, but we ended up with a 4-minute video, which we put onto the internet. And that was circulated until it reached the desk of quite a senior person in the White House, who looked at it and said, why aren't we doing this? So you can use videos, busy people, you know, that person could have read a book or a brief or something, but she watched the video. So you can use videos both for framing problems, but also for crisp ways of identifying solutions. The role play, I thought, brilliantly brought out the challenge of how you package ideas and present them to ministers. And you know, we've all, trust me, I've been on the wrong side of that, both in presenting ideas and on listening to it time and time again. And I thought it set up brilliantly the metacard analysis, the discussion at the tables. The most important thing that showed us, it seems to me, is that the resource people for this kind of problem are not on that side of the table, but on this side of the table, right? I mean, you came up with a set of guidelines for how to do policy work, which I thought was, you know, was a remarkable example of how well the wisdom of crowd works. Right? How many of you had really good, clear answers? I'm not going to read them all out, but a few thoughts struck me. One, and it picks up the discussion from the plenary session this morning, was the importance of the process of communications as a process right the way through your policy, your research and policy development. Communicate from the beginning. Part of the reason is that helps you communicate the problem early on. So in the work, for example, that Nancy mentioned that I'm doing on social impact bonds, our group has just started meeting, but we're already communicating publicly about what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And that's creating interest. People are getting in touch with us. Why are you doing this? What's, you know, how can we help? How can we contribute? So that by the time the working group has finished and has come up with some policy recommendations, people are interested, right? There's an appetite for it. People are beginning to think about the problem and are now keen to hear what our solution is. So think of communications not as something you do after you've done the research, but something that you start from the beginning, involving your communication specialists and communications teams, whether it's blogging or videos or doing papers or having meetings, doing workshops, who you engage in your policy-making process. All these things are a critical part. And I think that perhaps some of these recommendations here were a bit too based on the idea that you do the communications after you've done the research. You need to build the communications in from the beginning. My second reflection really on the whole discussion has been how little we've talked about the role of the private sector. We've talked about this as a relationship between think tanks, perhaps NGOs, and government. It's very, very powerful if you can go to ministers or government or indeed the media and say, we have got an alliance with firms in this area who are willing to invest in it or willing to implement it or who think it's a good idea. And you know, you look for allies beyond just the policy elite. Not everything is susceptible to that, and sometimes, what you're trying to do is something that isn't in the interests of firms. But very often you can find win-win situations. We did some work at the Centre for Global Development on incentivizing the development of new vaccines that would be particularly relevant in the developing world. And the fact that pharmaceutical firms were saying this would be a valuable incentive for us to enable us to develop new drugs for the developing world was incredibly powerful for the policymakers we were trying to influence. The fact that we as a think tank were able to come with an alliance of NGOs, of public health specialists, and companies to say this is a good idea really attracted people's attention, because it showed that we were building a big strategic alliances. And I was interested at how little discussion there was about the role of business in the private sector in the discussion today. And then the last thought I had about the discussion was that it's important to plan, it's important to practice, but it's also important to be opportunistic, right? Very often, life is the thing that happens to you while you're planning for your future. Very often, what you need to be doing is you need to be building the expertise, building the credibility, building the reputation, doing the research, but also be be willing to be flexible. Spot the opportunity where there is a particular, you've done the work. Nancy gave the example of Michael Clemens' work on immigration this morning, where something happens in Haiti and you've got a policy proposal that you can bring quickly because you've invested in the reputation and the research and so on. So yes, plan, yes, have your communication strategy and your outreach and so on, but also be willing to be flexible, get on the media quickly if something is going on that relates to your issues. Because that kind of opportunism is often, in the end, how things get done. It's being in the right place at the right time. And so I think, as an organization, you need to think about. Was it Jack Nicklaus? One of the golfers said that he only knew that the harder he practiced, the luckier he was. And you need to create your luck. By having the institutional structure in place, the research in place, but then look for the opportunities to get lucky. So for me, I thought this was a really rich session. I hope it's the beginning of a conversation. I can't speak for the TTI, but it seemed to me that there was enormous energy in wanting to share ideas and learn lessons about how to do this kind of thing. It was also striking to me how much commonality there was across different contexts. This wasn't, a lot of these ideas that we talked about apply just as much in Johannesburg or in Lusaka as they do in Washington or London. And it's not rocket science, right? How you do good communications, how you do policy outreach is not that hard when you think about it, and it probably doesn't vary much from one context to another. So we've got an enormous amount to learn from each other in this space, and I think still an enormous amount to do. Thanks very much. What am I going to say?
Thanks, everybody, for coming to this session. So this wraps up this session. And for those of you who want to delve a little bit deeper into the digital strategy world, some of our colleagues are going to be presenting a session this afternoon that may be of interest to many of you.